It's running. Okay, Harvey.
It is February 14, 2022, corresponding to Yud Adorishon 5782.
Okay, so this topic, as many of other topics, I think is a very fascinating one. It's we're going to talk about this sefer, which I mentioned it a few months ago when we were learning about Mayim Achronim. It's the Shalos Teshuvos Min Hashamayim, and I didn't have it. I didn't have access to it, so I called up the farm store and they sent it to me in the mail. So it's a fascinating sefer because it's a Shalos Teshuvos Min Hashamayim. It's questions addressed to the Shemayim. Exactly who were the questions addressed to? Was it to the Ribono Shel Olam, or was it addressed to Malachim? I'm not 100% sure. I get the impression from the language that it was addressed to the Malachim, and but I'm not sure how it's from the language, the way some of the shilos are formulated. It sounds like, but in any event, he's asking questions of Min Shemayim. I mean, if we had access to Min Shemayim to ask questions, that would be great. I once wrote an article about an email from Hashem, but I didn't base it on the sefer, but it would be really something to be able to ask questions. So the sefer goes through a lot of the questions in the sefer are areas where there's machlokas and unresolved or different positions. So he asked God, like, what do you think we should do? So I'll just show you some of the classical shilos that I just put on the first page. Sha'alti, on the top of the page, Sha'alti hanashim shemevarchas al lulav al mi shemevarach lehen al tkiya shofer im yesh aver bedavar im havi bracha v'tala. There's a big machlokas rishonim whether a woman is parted from lulav because it's a mitzvah to say she's man grama and she's parted from tkiya shofer. Nonetheless, could she make a bracha? So the Rambam holds she cannot, because since there's no chiyuv, she can't say v'tzivanu, and Rabbeinu Tam and Tosfos holds that she could. So it's a machokas. Basically, the Ashkenazim and the Sfardim, the Shulchan Aruch, as you know, the Beis Yosef, the Rav Yosef Cairo follows primarily the Rambam. He was a Sfardi, and therefore he says that you should not make a bracha, and that's how I pass in Shulchan Aruch. But the Ramah says that our minhag is the women do make a bracha. So this Rabbeinu, who was, by the way, Rabbi Yaakov Mimarvish, and I don't know if that's the right way to pronounce it. He was one of the Balei Taisus. He lived someplace in the end of the 1100s and the beginning of the 1200s. There were numerous Balei Tosas. We don't even know all the Balei Tosas, but the Balei Tosas was it wasn't just like an enterprise. I mean, we're familiar with the Ri and the Rabbeinu Tam, but there were a lot of, and the Rashbam, a lot of Balei Tosas, and they had yeshivas, and they discussed things and as a group. So he was one of the Balei Tosfos, and he was known as a kadosh, a very holy person. So he went ahead and he was presenting these shilos to the Shemayim. And so this is a shilo that it's a fundamental question whether whether a woman should make a bracha or not. So the response is veheshivu. The fact that he says it in plural implies that it's an angel, not the Ribono Shel Olam. V'yeshivu chi asher dari kol asher tomar lecha sara shma b'kola lechem alehem shuvu lechem lechem uvarchu es Hashem elokeichem. I don't know. It's very flowery language. Chi asher dari means that the generation get better, and then he says you should listen to what Sarah says. I don't know what that's an allusion to. And shuvu lechem lechem is what God told Moshe Rabbeinu after Kabbalah Torah. So he says, "V'ha'ed Megillah v'Chanukah, u'pirshuli ma matzino b'Megillah v'Chanukah ma'achar shahaya ba'osa nes." He says the basis to respond to this is Chanukah and Megillah. This is you'll see that his response is different than the position of either the Rambam or Rabbeinu Tam. But he says the test, the way to have testimony, meaning that the fundamental way to resolve this is from Megillah and Chanukah. Upirshuli Mamatzid Megillah and Chanukah. Why Megillah and Chanukah, even though they're also mitzvahs asayishas mangrama, although they're mitzvahs darbanan, but nonetheless women are chayiv. So the reason is everybody agrees that they would have to make a bracha because they were included in the nace of Chanukah and Purim. Uvululav nami matzino smach davar she'engo elo leivechel lovish b'shemayim. Lulav, the one of the symbols of lulav is that the person should have. There's only one branch, so a person should have one lave. In other words, he shouldn't. His heart shouldn't be divided in different directions. Uvishofer nami amrin Shem HaKadosh Baruch Hu imufani malchus shetam mechuni aleichem. The Gemara says in Rosh Hashanah that shofar is you're supposed to say malchios so that to anoint God. Zichron Hashavos Zichron Avosech Lefanav Tova Uvemel v'shofar and you do that exactly what the Gemara means. It's a discussion, but you use the shofar as an instrument to coronate the Rebbeinu Shalom. So the women also have that. If that's the symbolic meaning of shofar, so then it would apply to women and to lulav. So that would apply to women as well. So just like Chanukah and Megillah, we say that so they're shaykh to it. So similarly, they're shaykh to shofar and lulav. I mean, then that would mean though that would be limited. I mean, there's a lot of mitzvahs to say shesman gramas, and you have to look at all of them. The sukkah is also mitzvahs to say shesman gramas. Each mitzvah is going to say that a woman has shaykhs to. I don't know. That's what he says. And then he says, and then the next tshuva, Alti, I'll say the parsha shebetefillin. Another super major machlokes is the machlokes Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. What order are the parshas in the tefillin? The kachoi seshegasi. Ana hamelach hagadol hagibor v'nara chacham barazim megalon the stars magin alomas shomer habis v'chesed. This seems like he's talking to the Rebbeinu Shalom directly. He calls him the Melech HaGadol. I don't think he would call an angel a Melech HaGadol. The response, I guess, came from the Malachim, but he posed the question to the Rebbeinu Shalom. Tell your Malachim to let me know. Some say that Vahim Shemoah, the sheet of Rabbeinu Tam is Vahim Shemoah and Vahim Kiviyach. If you look on the bottom, you see on the left, the parshas that start with Vahaya should be in the middle. V'michav Psulos v'ata Melach Malachim Tzavig Malachecha K'toshim Hodieni Halachi Dirimi Dirimi Mechaviv. Whose position do you think is better? V'heshivu Elu V'elu Dirikim Chaim. There's both positions have validity. This is not only a machokas rishonim, but it's a machokas between God and Pamali Shemaya Island and his entourage, his angels. HaKadosh Baruch Omer Havayas Be'emsa. God says that V'hayim Shmoa like Rabbeinu Tam. And the Malachim say that it should be in the order. That's what Rashi Shita is. It goes according to the order of the way the parshas appear in the Chumash. V'hu asher diber Hashem b'krovei hakadesh ve'al penei kol ha'am ha'chabed. That's a pasuk after Achrei Mos Shnei B'nei Aaron. And he says, "V'zek kavodo bios parshas malchus shemayim tchila." It's the kavod, his kavod, that the malchus shemayim should be tchila. So what does he mean by that? He's talking about the kavod. This was, in other words, the malach is saying that. The malach is saying that it's God's kavod that malchus shemayim should be tchila. So what does he mean by that? Anybody have an idea? He means Shita Rabbeinu Tam, because the first parsha according to Rabbeinu Tam is Shema Yisrael. Shema Yisrael is Kabbalah Sol Malchus Shemayim. So he's saying that it's a bigger kavod to have Shema Yisrael first than to have Vayim Shemoah as the first parsha. The on the bottom of the page is the one that the one that worked through this Shalos Teshuvos was Zalman Margolis, Reuven Margolis. He was I think he was a librarian someplace in Eretz Yisrael, and he did a lot of scholarly work. So he published this though many years. I think this was about 70 years ago, 80 years ago. So in the footnote on the bottom, he makes an observation that's troubled me and many other people many times. Ini aplia geluya. This is not the words of Rabbi Yaakov, but this is the words of Rabbi Margolis. There's an obvious, super difficult question. How in the world did this machlokas develop? How could there be a difference of opinion? They were wearing tefillin since Kabbalas Torah. So what did they do before the machlokas? I mean, if yesterday they knew, so how did they forget it the next day? How could they forget such a thing? And he says, Rei brachas chav beis, Reisham et beis gabi takonas Ezra shehikshu b'gemara v'nechse Ezra heiche tikun. The Gemara had a shaila about takonas Ezra, and the Gemara says, why don't we see what people, how people are fulfilling the minhag. So Tosa says, so Tosa says that it's only possible that people forget something that's not done all the time. But if it's done all the time, like the Takanas Ezra, I think the Takanas Ezra probably refers to Tefillah. So, but the Takanas Ezra, it's not possible that the people don't remember how it's done because they're doing it every day. So, how did this? So I didn't. It maybe makes it a little bit better. The tshuva from Yaakov Marvish. By the way, Marvish is in France, in the Provence, wherever that is. Maybe have anybody been there? No. But the Provence was very famous. A lot of Rishonim lived in the Provence. I hope I'm pronouncing it the way the French would appreciate it. But that's where he was from. So further in the footnote he says, so it makes it a little bit better because you see the Machlokas didn't start with Rabbeinu Tam and Rashi. It goes all the way back to Kabbalas Torah. God wanted to do it a certain way, and the Malachim said do it a different way. Of course, that raises a tremendous question, and that is, what?
That doesn't make any sense. You have to believe that it's possible. Like, why do some people wrap film this way and the other people the other way? It could be that it doesn't make a difference. You start them with important you target, and you just target either way. They're both good. This could be also the same thing. Either way,
I mean, he pointed out that Rabbeinu Tam says if you do it the other way, it's possible. Now you also the mitzvah, you have to do it over again. And I don't think he's not. Yeah. Nobody says you could do it either way. That both are kosher. It's one way or the other.
No, but it doesn't have to be the one sheet that has to definitely be wrong.
Question of which version did Moshe Rabbeinu wear?
Yeah, that's right. What did Moshe Rabbeinu wear?
Okay, all right.
And I mean, what troubles me is why? How in the world is it possible the Malachim argue with God? Why? Not only because of the audacity, but if they're godly creatures, how did they come up with their own svara that's contrary to what God's thinking? I mean, how does that work? I don't know. Further in the footnote, he points out that in the archaeological digs in Eretz Yisrael, they found an old pair of tefillin that had the order of Rabbeinu Tam. So there's already archaeological evidence for Rabbeinu Tam in the.
They found both in Midbar Yehuda. They found both.
They found both. Okay.
Yes.
I mean, there's a big shaila how much you rely on archaeological evidence. It's also shaila. It's relevant for shiurim because the big machlokas, whether it's niskatnu or shiurim and the Chazon Ish shiurim or Ram Chaim Noah and then they found mikvos, and mikvos have to be a certain shear, the hole in the mikvah between connecting two boros, sheferas hano, and there's a certain amount of etzbos. So, But that's good for another share. Whether how much you could rely on archaeological evidence. The underlying question here, which maybe I'll talk about in maybe next week or the following week, is this whole idea of if God has one opinion, how could it be El Divin Chaim? How could both opinions have validity if God, and presumably, like somebody just pointed out that I think God told Moshe Rabbeinu the order. He didn't say, okay, do whatever you want. So doesn't that become how does it, if afterwards they didn't?
How do we know that?
How do we know that he told? I would assume when Moshe was on Har Sinai for 40 days, you think God told them to do like the Malachim?
Mode, we say that was the details were left to the Chapomim. I mean, there's things that Halacha Moshe, right? I thought there were.
Well, I don't know. That's unique with Chal Moed because the Torah is ambiguous. But I don't know. Tefillin, you want to say that it's also left to Chal. I don't know.
Don't we know that Gemara's to talk about, that Bosco comes down and says halacha one way and Hashem said?
Yes. Right. So they're correct. And that's what we're going to talk about. Torah Lab Shemayim. The Gemara says it doesn't matter what the Rebbeinu Shalom wants. So that needs a lot of explanation, but I'm not going to go into that this week.
Do you put more weight on the Teshuvos since they're Min HaShemayim, or like Mimon HaShach? If we truly believe it's Min HaShemayim, and then that's how we should be pasking.
You are preempting me. That's what my shir is about. How much? Very good. How much weight does this carry? Does this swing? So you'll see that as a result of this first tshuva, there was a tremendous machlokas about what in fact should the women who were living in Eretz Yisrael and were following the minig of the Sephardim. Okay, I'll show you. I don't want to give it away, but you'll see that there was a tremendous machlokas that developed because of this tshuva, and okay, it's a machlokas between two of the participants were the Birkei Yosef, Yosef Chaim David Azulai, and Rabbi Yosef. So I wanted to show you. Look at the.
Did you finish what you were going to say about the rest of this footnote? Did he say anything else of interest?
He said a lot of things.
Oh,
I'm happy to lend the sefer to you.
Okay.
If the psicha here is like 40 pages, so
that's 40. That's too many pages.
I didn't want to stay. I'm happy to lend it to you here. Here, this is all. This is about the tefillin.
But it's all about a lot. Okay.
Yeah, see here.
Yeah, no, I see.
I don't want them to miss out on it. He has. Look at this. He has a little print. So I didn't copy the whole thing. But if you want to borrow it, I'm happy to lend it to you.
I can take pictures of those pages. Okay.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Look at the last page. I found this tshuva afterwards. I didn't realize it was there. This is tshuva Ayin Beis. Here's this is the first question that he should have asked if the Rebbeinu Shalom is answering his questions. So he wanted to know he wanted to know when's Mashiach coming. That's a great question. That's like you tell the Talmidim, that's a great question. This is the best. So what is the answer? I don't know. Lo matzah again. I don't know if it means the malachim. They didn't know what the answer to that question is. It's also a big. He has a long arichas about it. They were different. The Rishonim had different zmanim when they assumed that Mashiach could have come or should have come or would have come. But so he asked the Rebbeinu Shalom, and as long as we're on the last page, the Radvaz makes note that about this sefer. And the Radvaz lived around in the 1500s, and he authenticates the value of the sefer, because the question maybe the sefer who said that this is real, who said that it really happened, that he asked questions. So he says. Where I have it underlined. Now the question is, how did he ask these questions? How did he get What did he do? Did he put a kvittel in the kosel? How did he get the questions up to the Shemaim? So he says, "Ayidei hispodu tefila v'askar shemus." He isolated himself and he davened and he said certain the holy names of Hashem. V'hayu moshivim lo al sheilosov. And they would respond to his. He's talking here about whether you say krivitz in the middle of kedusha. So, but he said that this is one of the shilos in the sefer, the shilos Teshuvos from the Shemayim. But he says it was through his bodus with tefillah. Other places I saw that it says it was in chalomos, that he went to sleep, and he had dreams, and that's where he when he interacted with the malachim was in chalomos, and he has a long discussion here also in the introduction about different gedolim who recorded their dreams. Maybe I'll put some on the notes for maybe next week or the week after. That they relied on their dreams to render piskei halacha. The underlying question about all these things is to what extent does supernatural knowledge play a role in halacha? Do we factor it in or we don't? Does it make a difference? We talked about maybe 3 years ago. We talked about whether if a person's a chola on Shabbos and he or she is a chol sheish bo sakana, and there's a big tzaddik in another city, are you allowed to get on your camel or donkey or whatever? They didn't go in cars, but are you allowed to chal Shabbos in order to go to the Rabbi and get a bracha? Because after all, there was just this. I don't know if the presentation took place yesterday morning from Dr. Apfel. He told this amazing story about Rabbi Kanevsky, that there was a fetus, and the ultrasound showed that the fetus was not viable. There was no way that the fetus could survive because there was a hole in the heart, and there was one doctor in Boston that was willing to do surgery. What do they call it? Intra, whatever, in the womb. What? Intrauteral. So I think that Dr. Apfel was involved in advising the couple. So they said, okay, but we want to ask Rav Chaim Kanievsky. So they asked Rav Chaim Kanievsky, and he said, don't go. The baby, there's nothing wrong with the baby. Stay here in Eretz Yisrael. So he said, like, this was already too much for his emunus chachamim at the time to handle that. They saw the scans, and they sent the scans to America and all the doctors, and he had, this was written up in a newspaper article. He brought the article. Maybe I have it still at home. So but okay, the Rav Chaim said not to do anything. So and then when it came time for the baby to give birth, nobody wanted to admit her into the hospital because they all knew the circumstances. Nobody wanted to have a delivery of a child who was going to be stillborn like that. And anyway, in the end, they somehow or other she got to the hospital, and lo and behold, the baby was 100% normal. And like the doctors couldn't believe it. What was the scan a mistake or what? Underlying is Rav Chaim's Rebbitzin said that he talks to Eliyahu Navi every night. That was Rebbitzin Kanevsky said. So if somebody wants to go to Rav Chaim, let's say somebody's deathly ill, and in New York City, and it's now Shabbos, and you want to get a bracha from Rav Chaim, so are you allowed to get onto an airplane and fly to Israel because maybe Rav Chaim will save the person's life? So that was a big machlokas. There was somebody that paskined that way, that you could be Michal Shabbos in order to get a bracha, and I forgot who it was that was he wrote a scathing tshuva, and he said that anybody paskins that way will be their certification will be annulled. They lose their license to paskin. But there are others that said that it is permissible. So that question was, to what extent, that's an example of something supernatural, to what extent does it play a role in halacha do we operate only in the physical world, or we don't? So it was Rosh Kluger that wrote the tshuva, very 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 powerful tshuva. So these are three tshuvas here. On the next page, I will show you. Here's another tshuva. Look at the middle of the page. This is where I came to the Sefer in the first place, because we were discussing my Achronim earlier in the year. So one of the tshuvas was in the middle of the page. Oznis tapaknu b'mayim achronim ki yesh mecham omrim ki b'ymeinu ein nikiyas yadayim she'en shemen arev ve'en lachush mayim achronim. Some say that mayim achronim is only. They used to have a minhag. After the end of the meal, they would wash their hands with oil because their hands got soiled, and that was the way, like a cleaning process. But today, people are not such mufunakim. They don't do so, not so fastidious. So some Rishonim say that you don't. I mean, the Gemara says Mayim Achronim. The Gemara has a few reasons. One of the reasons is because of Melch Sodomus, because the salt from Sodom would cause blindness. So the Rishonim say that we don't have that salt. At least most of us, where we live, we don't have that type of salt, so there's no reason to wash Mayim Achronim. But the Gemara has the other reason about cleanliness of the hands. So he says, so I asked, do I have to be concerned for those chachamim that say that you don't have to wash Mayim Achronim? V'yishivu, and they answered, Mi zeh amar v'tehi Hashem lo tziva, Mayim Rishonim Achronim davar shebekdusha. The Mayim Achronim, who is it that said something that God did not command? Mayim Rishonim, Mayim Achronim are bring kedusha. That's pretty powerful. That if you don't do something that leads to kedusha, so just like you're lenient with kedusha, God will be lenient with your life, and the person will not his life will be cut short. Kach heshivu be'emes, and this is quoted by a lot of the Svarim. For example, the Birkei Yosef says. Right underneath, Vafil Noagin Kain, Chassid Marziknena Harav Chassid Mahara Azoloi, Bagosav Xaviado. The Birkei Yosef saw a lot of Xaviads, a lot of manuscripts, because he traveled around. He raised money for the Jewish community in Israel. And he traveled around Europe, so he made it his business to go to different libraries and see. He quotes. He had a photographic memory, because he quotes hundreds of svarim and manuscripts that he saw. So he says, the Mekubalim say that you should wash Mayim Achronim, and you shouldn't be mekel. So apparently the Rav Yaakov mi Marvish, what Kiso, I think, is what, a nephew? Is Kiso a nephew?
His brother-in-law.
A brother-in-law. The brother-in-law of the Mordechai, who was one of the Rishonim. And on the bottom of the page, the Sefer Charedim, who lived in the 16th century, he lived in Tzvas, and he says, "My mechar mechova v'davar shebekdusha hem v'amekel mekilin yimad v'shmosov kach yeshiv v'nishmayim v'dei shelos chalom v'giso shel." Okay, so a lot of this farm quote the Shalos Teshuvos min Shemayim, so they take it seriously. So on the top of the page, the Chidah wrote a lot of different svarim, and one of the svarim that he wrote was called Yosef Ometz, and he says there, he quotes the Shulchan Aruch says, "Aminik shel nashim mevarchos." The Ramah says that the minig is the women make a bracha on lulav v'esrog. So he says, Linyan halacha on the left side, on the top of the page. Linyan halacha, ani adam me'eser isi ma'ashashiva min Shemayim Rabbeinu Yaakov mimarvish. The Beis Yosef paskins like the Rambam, that women should not make a bracha. So the Chidah, who also lived in Eretz Yisrael, but he's much later than the Rambam, says that after he saw the tshuva of Rabbeinu Yaakov mimarvish, Moshe Beisi v'Sefer HaKot and Birkei Yosef, I changed my position, because if God said to do it this way, so that's what we should be doing. Ukamida kadam shahayu nagos anashim be'ir hakadosh Yerushalayim, and that was the early minhag in Eretz Yisrael that they made a bracha in Yerushalayim. V'hagam damaran pasuk shelo yivarchu. Even though the Beis Yosef said not to make a bracha on that the woman should not make a bracha, Nira Vadai the Ilu Moran Zal Sholto Mar Enev Hakdoshim B'Chus Rabbeinu Yaakov Mimarvish. Had the Beis Yosef, he says, I am certain that if the Beis Yosef had seen these Shalos Teshuvos, the Mishamayim Mia Yava Kol Chavarch L'Nashim, that from the Shemayim they empowered women to make a bracha, Vadei Kacha Yiposich L'Mani, that Beis Yosef certainly would have been knowing that way. Uvichi Ho Lo Shayach Lo B'Shemayim, and you can't say the argument that we don't paskin according to what Malachim tell us, because Torah Lav Shemayim, the Kemi Deishabi Gedolim B'Poskim, the Sfiru the Yivarchu, Ahanya Lei lifts the Kamos and Kemi Dislei Siyata Dishmaya. We're going to go into that more detail. How could you? What significance is Shalos Shuvin Shemayim if Torah Lav Shemayim? Okay, he said he discussed it in Shem Magdom. Shem Magdom, this is the sefer here, is the Chidah has a bibliography of different authors and Svarim. It's a very famous work that he put together, and it's widely used. So the Chidah basically reversed the minhag. The Beis Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Cairo established the minhagim. He was the last word, because he was held in such great respect. He established the minhagim in Tzvas, and in much of Eretz Yisrael. There was a different community in Yerushalayim that had different gedolim. The Mahar al-Bach, the famous machlokas about smicha was between the Chachmei Tzvas and the Chachmei Yerushalayim. So they were two different groups. But the Beis Yosef was in Tzvas, and as time went on, the Beis Yosef, for the Sfardim, the Beis Yosef became the last word. So comes along the Chidah, who lived probably about 500 years after, no, not 500, he lived about 300 years after the Chidah lived, well, maybe 200 years, 250 years. The Chidah lived at the end of the 1700s, I believe. Or in the 18th century, so even though they had followed the Beis Yosef, Beis Yosef lived in the end of the 15th century. No, he was in the 16th century, I think. Yeah. Beis Yosef lived. So 200 years or 250 years later, after the Beis Yosef established the halacha for Eretz Yisrael. So comes along the Chidah, and he says, no, we're going to change it. Because since they printed now, since this was not, the Sefer was not available. It was in manuscript. But now that we have, and you saw the Radvaz said he had some of the Teshuvos, I don't know where the manuscripts were sitting, but they put together the Sefer. So he says, if it says it in the Shalos Teshuvos Mishamayim, that's what we have to do. Comes along, and then there's other Sfarim that also quote the Shalos Teshuvos Mishamayim. Okay, there's in the next page. I have the Kaf HaChaim, the Rav Chaim. I always pronounce it wrong. Flagi. He also quotes the Shalos Teshuvos Min Shemayim B'Mayim Achorim. But what we're going to see is that Rabbi Yosef, who made it his life's goal to L'Hachzer Atar L'Yoshta, the Beis Yosef was the posik for the Sfardim. But as time went on, many of his psakim were reversed by other gedolim. So for example, the Chidah, this is a good example. The Chidah argues with the Beis Yosef and says that the women should make a bracha on Luban Esrog, and the Ben Ish Chai, who was the Rav in Baghdad, was held in tremendous esteem. And he also disagreed with the Beis Yosef on a lot of things, and he changed the minhagim of the Sfardim. He was in Baghdad, so he was in the Middle Eastern countries. So these two people in particular, the Chidah and the Ben Ish Chai, they had tremendous influence among the Sfardim. So they reversed a lot of, or they changed a lot of the decisions that were made by Beis Yosef. So Ravad Yosef made it his life's mission to bring everything back, to bring the crown back to its original glory. That he held that the Beis Yosef was Moran Shal Eretz Yisrael. He was the last word. He was the Rabbi of Eretz Yisrael. He was the last word, and therefore we have to follow the Beis Yosef. So he takes on in a long tshuva that I think I wrote it down. Maybe it's 15 pages. He has a long tshuva. 13 pages. I only pulled out small parts of the tshuva, but he writes a long tshuva where he disagrees with the Chidah and says we should not follow, the Sfardim should not follow the Shalos Teshuvos Min Hashemayim. And if you look on page 7, what I found fascinating is there was no date on the tshuva, so I didn't know when it was published. I wanted to know how old he was when he wrote this tshuva, this 13-page tshuva, where he must quote around 1,000 sources. So and he's taking on himself the achrayus to disagree with the Chidah. That wasn't a little person. So he was the giant of the Sephardic world. So this tshuva was printed in the first chelik of his Sefer Yabia Omer, which is a 11-volume Sefer of Shalos Teshuvos that touches the enormous amount of topics. So, but he has this volume he has a haskama from Rav Yitzchak Isaac Levi Herzog, who was the first chief rabbi of Eretz Yisrael, and he wrote this haskama in Tafshin Yudal, which was 1954. And he just to see what he writes, he says, "Emes nitna le'yamar shiyanti v'sefer chodesh harav hagon acharv v'baki Sinai v'okaharim yorei Hashem mirabin Ravad Yosef v'chidushi shel Torah shelo matzu chen be'enai ki hu holach ha'meisharim v'bekiyas hatzuma v'avon yishar." He says he went in the right direction and he has tremendous bekiyas. V'advarim smeichim v'yirim ki hu holach v'dolel p'nimi mi'amkei Torah seina akdosha. And he says, I'm sure, in the last paragraph, but he wasn't famous then. He was, in fact, he left Eretz Yisrael and he went to Egypt, and he became a Rav in Egypt. He left Egypt because he almost got killed there because of things that he preached. So, but anyway, I found this Haskell was written in 1954. So obviously, the Sefer, the Shalos Teshuvos, was published. It wasn't published after, at least it was completed by 1954. The Tshuva could have been written in 1953 or 52 or 51. So Rabbi Yosef in 1954 was only 34 years old. He was a young man, 34. So, because he was born in 1920. So at 34 years old, he was like a lion. He wasn't, even when you're 80 years old, to go butt heads with the Chidah, even though he was defending the Beis Yosef, but still, I'm like, if somebody else would write a sefer and say, I don't agree with the Chidah, they would first they would put the sefer in Cherem, then they would put it in Shemus and bury it, and they would burn it maybe in effigy. Who are you? You're arguing with the Chidah. I mean, the Chidah. You look at the Chidah's Svarim. He was a super unbelievable Talmud Chacham, and he quotes so many different sources in his Svarim, and he wrote. I don't remember how many Svarim he wrote. I think there was somebody in Eretz Yisrael that wanted to put together a chumash from the Chidah. He contacted me. He was looking for sponsors, and he said the Chidah wrote around 90 different Svarim, and they wanted to be malaked from the Svarim on the chumash, things that were scattered throughout the Svarim, so that you'll have in one place, you'll have the Chidah chumash. I think he succeeded in publishing in the end. But he authored close to 100 Svarim. So he was from the super giants of the Gedolei Yisrael, but Rabbi Yosef was not deterred, and he So he says his conclusion is no. Don't let's go back to the Beis Yosef's minute. So this was a major. This is a tremendous battle between the Chidah and Rabbi Yosef. You know, people like to watch boxing matches, which doesn't particularly interest me. But here, this is like this is much more fascinating to see two Gedolim fighting it out, battling it out, Melchamto Shel Torah. And it's also much more spiritual. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight, at least to the extent, it's already almost time to daven Marv. But at least we'll start the topic. So the big question here, which some of you have raised already, on the Shalos Teshuvos Min Shemayim, is that, doesn't that contradict the Gemara that says, Torah La B'Shemayim? Why is he asking Shalos to the Ribono Shel Olam? It's irrelevant what God says. And the Gemara expresses that the Gemara is such a beautiful piece of Gemara, and it's so magnificent. I'm sure you've seen it before, but it pays to read it over again because the imagery and the you could just see the story unfolding. You can see the Torah giants fighting with each other, and the walls of the Beis Medrash are shaking. So Gemara says the Gemara begins in the Tan Hasam, right on top of Bab Metzia. I had to put it in from Amud Aleph. Tanan Hasam Chotel Chuyos v'Nasan Chol Ben Chuyo Chuyo. Rabbi Ozer Mitar v'Chacham Mitamim. If you had a oven, and so Cheres is Mekabel Tuma, but earthenware is not, or earth is not Mekabel Tuma. So if you had an oven and it was made of, like it was like the spinal cord. It was made of different circular pieces, and then they connected them with dirt in between. So is it called a kli or is it not called a kli? So it's a machlokas Rabbi Ozer Mitar v'Chacham Mitamim. V'zehu tanur shel, and then we're going into the Gemara. V'zehu tanur shel Achnoi. This was the famous tanur of Achnoi. My Achnoi, where did the word Achnoi come from? Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Shakifu devarim ka'achna zu v'timuhu. The Chachamim surrounded this oven like a snake would, because the snakes would, when there's danger, the snake would put its tail into its mouth. Some of the snakes, I guess, would put its tail in its mouth, so it forms a circle. So the Chachamim formed a circle around this issue, and they made it tamei. So the Gemara tells what happened. Tana v'osa yom heishi Rabbi Elazar kol tshuva sheba'olam v'kibu himenu. Rabbi Elazar is the one that said that the oven is tar, but Chachamim say it's tamei. So the Chachamim were the majority. So the Chachamim had all sorts of proofs against Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar answered all the proofs. Kol tshuva sheba'olam. It's obviously exaggeration, but it's exaggeration which shows you the power of what he was able to do. Amar lehem. So Rabbi Elazar said, Im halacha kamosi charuv ze yochiach. This boxer tree will prove that I'm correct. Neka charuv mikoma mei amma. So the tree was uprooted 100 amas. And some said it was 400 amas. An amma is almost 2 feet, so it was either 200 feet or 800 feet. So if we were there and we saw the tree uprooted, because Rabbi Elazar said, so first we would have been scared to death, and we would have said, okay, got it, I'm sorry for expressing my opinion. He said, what, you bring a rye from a tree? You can't bring a rye from a tree. If the water should prove the stream, so the stream changed courses. We don't bring a raya from Amasamayim. Why Rabbi Elazar, once they rejected the first raya, he goes through a whole series of things. Why did he think that the water would be a better proof than the tree? I don't know. So Chazer v'Yamar lehem im halacha kamosi kosei beis hamedrash yochichu. If the halacha means, then the walls of the beis hamedrash will prove that I'm correct. Hitu kosei beis hamedrash lipo. The walls of the beis hamedrash were leaning, about to fall. Gar behem Rabbi Yeshua. So Rabbi Yeshua yelled at the walls. Amar lehem im talmidei chachamim menatzim zeh b'halacha atem ma tivchem. So if the Chachamim are battling over halacha, who asked you to get involved? What's your business? Or what standing do you have? So lo naflu b'nei kvadosh of Yeshua. So the v'lazakvu b'nei kvadosh of Elazar. The walls remain slanted like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. V'dayim matim v'omdim, and the walls are still. You could still see them. At least in those days, you could still see them. It's too bad that we can't see the walls. Chazer v'yomer lehem im halacha kamosi. So now he pulled out the biggest proof. Min hashamayim yochichu. The God from the heavens, let God ascertain that I'm correct. Yotzis abasko v'amra malachem eitzel Rabbi Elazar shalacha kamos v'kol makom. So God said, or whoever it was, the Baskel said, who are you to argue with Rabbi Elazar? The halachas Rabbi Elazar throughout Shas. Amar Rabbi Yeshua Aragos. Rabbi Yeshua was one of the Chachamim. V'amar lo v'shamayim he. Rabbi Elazar said Torah's not in the Yeshua said Torah's not in the Shemayim. My lo v'shamayim. What does that mean? It's not in the Shemayim. Rabbi Yomishikar did the Torah mehar Sinai. Torah was already given to man. It's no God gave it away. God, you already wrote in the Torah, we're passing, we're the Rov. Chachamim, we're the Rov. So it doesn't matter what you say or what he says. Amar you see, these are such great people. Rabbi Nosson bumped into Eliyahu Navi. So he said, he asked Eliyahu Navi, what's God entertaining himself with now? He was laughing. God said, wow, my children have overpowered me. And he was laughing, means he was happy because he was proud of what they did. Amru also yom heviu kol tara shatira b'lazar v'sarfim be'esh. So they went ahead and they burnt all the Rabbi Elazar hold the tanner was tar. So people when asked him shas, he said they would never touch the tanner is tar. So because they said that's not the halacha, they burned all the taros. V'sarfim be'esh v'nimnu olav u'barchu, and they took a vote. And barchu here is a euphemism, as it often is. It means that they cursed them. They put him in chayrim. And they said, who's going to go to Rabbi Elazar? They were still scared of him. Rabbi Kiva, who was a great person in his own right, said, okay, I'll go. Rabbi Kiva says, better that I should go, because otherwise somebody will go and he'll upset Rabbi Elazar and he'll destroy the whole world. So he wore black clothing. So he sat 4 amas away. Rabbi Elazar said to Rabbi Kiva, why stay different than the other day? Why are you sitting on the floor in black garments? He said, I think that your colleagues are separating themselves from you, because what he meant to allude to was the fact that he put him in Mecherim. Afu kara begadav. So Rabbi Elazar made kriya v'chalos manolav, and he took off his shoes. V'nishma v'yashal gabi karka zolgo einav d'maos. The world, tears came from his came streaming down from his eyes. Laka olam shlish b'zeisim shlish b'chitim b'shlish b'sa'orim. So the world was afflicted. 1/3 was the olives, 1/3 grain, and 1/3 barley. They I don't know what happened to them. They rotted or whatever. So here you have the tremendous gedolim battling it out over this shayla of the Tanur Shalach Noi. But the conclusion of the Gemara is very clear: the Torah la b'shamayim. So how in the world is it possible that that Rav Yaakov from Vermaish, is that what it was, from Mimarvish? How is it possible that he should ask Shilas to the Rebbeinu Shalom? What does it matter? Torah la b'shamayim.
Well, there's nobody who's countering him. In other words, in this case, in the Gemara, they said We don't care. You have to prove to us. You have to come up with you're one person. You may be great, but there's more of us. And you have to. We don't care about nisim. We don't care about that. We care about the argument. You have to argue by Torah. And if you can't prove it by arguing by Torah, we don't care about all these things happening. We respect you, but still, that's
Yeah.
what Torah says. The majority.
So
will.
why is
In
that
this case,
different? Why is it different than Rashi
Because
and Rabbi
the-
Tam Tefillin? Why do I care what the Shemaim say? It's Torah Shemaimi. If God had
But-
appeared in the base medrash where Rashi and
Who's
Rabbeinu,
disagreeing? But he's asking the question. Who's disagreeing with him? He's trying
who's
to find
disagreeing
out.
with who? He said that the halacha is like Rabbeinu Tam. So he's disagreeing with Rashi. What do we care what God says? We should Torah Shemaimi.
No, but he's still arguing. What I'm saying is he himself is not sure. He's going to ask, but then people can still argue with him and still win the fight.
People who argue with who?
With Rabbi Yaakov, he's asking from Shemayim to
Yeah,
give.
but
an answer.
why does it matter why did he bother inquiring what God thinks? It's irrelevant. It has no bearing on anything.
He's still maybe he's just curious.
I was just
but
curious.
He's going to win the argument. He just wants to know.
Okay, so you're
He
saying
wants to know.
You say he
Doesn't
didn't
he's
mean-
going to win. He just wants to know.
I'm laughing, but what you're saying is sort of what Rabbi Yosef is going to say later on. That it's not. You can't take it as a basis for Psakolochi. It wasn't intended that way.
No,
Like you said, it was more to see where
Yeah.
God stood than it was a hypothetical sort of.
And why did
Isn't,
he get an
isn't, it,
answer?
isn't it where you have an unsettled machlokes, okay? Then you can consult with Shema when it's really true. This case in the Gemara, there was Achrei Rabbi Lahatos. There was
Yeah,
a majority that
I'm
went
saying,
against
yeah,
the view of Rabbi
that's
Lezer.
right. It's done. They had the fight.
Okay, that's a very good point. There may be the only time you say Torah Rabbi Shemaimi is where it conflicts with Achrei Rabbi Lahatos. Okay, very good point. What were you saying?
Yeah, what was the point then of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Like, why engage in this in the whole? And like, what was the point of the malachim?
Rabbi,
If it was no Torah, like you would think.
who
that,
you talking about the Chas
Yeah.
Shemaim?
Like,
But that's the question. Why did he go the effort?
No, but if the point was just for him, but it had no ramifications, and also why did he write it down? Like, then what was the?
Yeah, well,
what was the-
yeah. So, I mean, Rabbi Yosef says that it was just a dream, and it was how does he express it? He says, all right, it's in here someplace. We'll leave it for next week. But that Rabbi Yosef explains. He responds to what you're asking. So, but look at on page 4.
Rabbi, in the case of Rashi and Rabbeinu, it's just two people are disagreeing. So where do you have Achrei Rabbi Mahato?
You don't have that's a good point. That's what people here are saying. Where are you in Arizona?
Yeah, Sedona.
Okay, so all the way from Arizona, you're saying the same thing as the guys here are saying.
Okay.
That you can't compare the two cases because here's Achrei Rabbi Mahatos, and here there is no Achrei Rabbi Mahatos.
You are
But-
not clear like Rashi. I think I don't know when he wrote this in relation to when people.
Well, who's we? I mean, there are those people that follow Rashi. Those people follow Rabbeinu Tam. I mean, I guess everybody wears Rashi's throne.
Yeah,
They wear it.
The halach is shot like Rashi, and then like people is a nice.
Okay. But here, I'm going to show you where the real problem is. A bigger problem than the Gemara. Because the problem is from the Rambam on the next page, on page 4. The Rambam says, Torah Rav Shemaimi just means that we don't pay attention what God says. But the Rambam says an even stronger halacha. The Rambam's talking about the authority of a Navi. If a Navi comes along and tries to uproot, he says that this halacha is no longer relevant. Osha Amar Bedin Midini Torah Hashem Tzivulo Shadin Kachuv V'Halacha Kedivrei Ploni. Or if he says that there's a machlokas, he says that God told me that the halacha is like this one. Harei Navi Sheker v'Chanek. He's a Navi Sheker, and he dies by choking. Avol Bisha Asa Os, Even if he performed a miracle to prove his point. Shaharei bo lahachish Torah, because he's arguing with what it says in the Torah. Shamar lo b'shamayim. Torah is lo b'shamayim. So therefore, if the Navi says that I heard from God that the halacha is like this in this person, it's irrelevant because Torah lo b'shamayim. So here already first of all, the Rambam expands it to where it's not a Achar Rabbi Lahatos. He says there's a machlokas. So the Navi comes and says, I heard from God how to paskin. So the Rambam says that's Navi Sheker. But it's furthermore, in other words, it's not only an issue of ignoring it. If Torah Lav Shemaimi, you don't pay attention, but it's an issue of Navi Sheker. According to the Rambam, L'chora, what Rav Yaakov did in writing the Shalos Jews, Chas Shalom, but L'chora is like a Navi Sheker, because he's quoting God as taking positions on halachic disputes. And the Rambam is even sharper in the Perish Mishnayos on Pirkei Avos. The Rambam says, I have an underline here, he says, he explained before what's the role of a Navi. He says in certain areas it's different. But when it comes to studying Torah, a Navi has no superior position to anybody else that's studying Torah. If the Navi will have one explanation, he says this is the Pshat Nigmar, and somebody else is Talmud Chacham says that's not. I disagree. So they're both equal. V'yomar Navi, Amar li Hashem, and even if the Navi says God told me, Ki pirushihu nachon, ain't shamlo, we don't pay any attention to him. El afilu elef neviim shekulim keliyahu, ve'elisha pirshu eizu pirish. Even if you have 1,000 neviim that are like Eliyahu and Elisha, and they had a certain explanation. The elf chachamim v'chacham pirshu hepech, and if there's 1,001 chachamim that disagreed, so even though the 1,001 are arguing with 1,000 neviim, hepechos the pirish achar ramahatas, we follow them in the majority. We do like the 1,001 Talmidei Chachamim. We don't follow the Nevi'im. And then in the next column he says, Lo b'shemayim v'lo himchano Hashem el Nevi'im el himchano el Chacham b'ayidin. I think himchano means to make us subservient. That God did not make us subservient to the Nevi'im when it comes to Torah. He made us subservient to the Chachamim. Lo amar uvasa el hanavi, el amar uvasa el kohen malviim el shoftim. In Parshas Shoftim, it says that when you have a shayla, ben dam ledam, ben din ledin, so the Chumash says you should go you should come to Velisa, and you should go uvasa el kohen malviim el shofet sheyeh b'yam haim, I think. So yes, correct. So. Right, Yiftach b'daro kishmul b'daro. So the Rambam says that their Navi has nothing to contribute. It's irrelevant to us what the Navi says, because since Torah Lav Shemaimi, the Navi has nothing to contribute. And furthermore, if he tries to twist our arms and say this is what you should be doing because I heard from God, he becomes a Navi Sheker. Because in God's Torah, it says, Torah Lav Shemaimi. So he's contradicting God's Torah by saying that you should follow what God told me. So he's a Navi Sheker. So now the question becomes even much more powerful. And the Shalos Teshuvos min Shemayim.
Like the no Slav God, when he said, hang on, let me ask God what to do.
That's Moshe.
How does that fit in with?
This is a very, very good question. Well, the thing is,
Somebody else to answer it, I guess. I mean,
the thing is that even though Torah Lav B'Shemayim, but at some point it was B'Shemayim, because the Torah,
That was not.
when God gave the Torah to Moses, it wasn't given over yet.
it was.
So, but it wasn't completed. The Torah. I mean, that's a very good question. When exactly was Torah written? The Gemara says that Moshe, right before he died, he wrote the whole Torah except for the last 9 psukim, or some. Either he wrote it b'dimah or he didn't write it. But the Torah was the process of giving over the Torah was unfolding still. That I think that's a very, very good question, but I think that's the answer. The process had not finished until Moshe Rabbeinu died, because there's things that Moshe Rabbeinu taught the people that they hadn't heard before. Things in Devarim that he taught them that were new. He taught the mitzvah of tzitzis first appears in the Shlach. So it would appear that they weren't. Okay, I don't know. I mean, it's a good question. Exactly what is it, the Gemara, it seems to say the opposite. The Gemara seems to say that they were given all the mitzvahs on Sinai. And then the question is, what about those mitzvahs that had to do with things that happened later on? Pesach Sheni. Yeah, okay. It's a complicated topic. I don't know. It's a good question you're asking. But be as it may, that's the major, that's the core of the issue here. In this machlokas that we're going to see between Rabbi Yosef and the Chidah, whether you should pay the Chidah, change the minhag based on this sefer, Shalos Teshuvos from the Shemayim, and Rabbi Yosef says he can't change it based on Shalos Teshuvos from the Shemayim. So the core of the machlokas is going to be, to what extent does Nevuah play a role in halacha? That's
Well, you can't make it into a navi though. We said there's no more.
or whatever it is. So not Nevuah, but chalomos or inspiration or
But is there a distinction?
direct
Because
line.
He's not claiming. He's talking to Malachim, not to God, right? He's saying, "What did God think?"
Well, but the Malachim told them I assume you could trust the Malachim. They said this is what God said. Okay, we'll see next week in greater detail.
Yes, Rabbi.
Good night, Bob.
Good night. Thank you.
You're welcome. Enjoy.
Very much.